Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Set Lusting Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson. Joining me today is someone that I had spent a lot of time via email and actually got to meet a couple of weeks ago. Melissa, welcome to the podcast.
Hi there. Thanks so much for having me. I can't believe it's been a few weeks already. Time just really
Yeah,
flies.
yeah. So, why don't you introduce yourself to the team?
Sure. So I'm Melissa Ziobro. I am the Director of Curatorial Affairs for the Bruce Springsteen Archives and Center for American Music at Monmouth University. I am also a longtime history professor at the university.
What That's a big title. What does that mean?
Our team is growing, right? And my role pertains to the stewardship of the physical collection and our interpretive efforts. That is, what are the stories that we want to tell now, and especially in that beautiful building behind me, which will be opening next year? And how do we tell them?
I will, we're going to get to some other stuff, but I did want to share an experience. Few years ago, maybe longer than that, my sister was coming up to visit here in Dallas. And I asked her, what do you want to do? And she said, I really would love to go to the President Bush Library here in
Oh,
Dallas. And I said, okay. And so we went because we joke about I'm much more liberal than she is. And so my wife and I went and were blown away how amazing a museum it was. And since then, my wife and I have made a point of any time we're anywhere near a presidential library, we go visit. And we're fascinated by the times of the president, the decisions he had to make. One of the exhibits at the George Bush Library is an interactive, and it lists all the crises that happened in his presidency. And then you pick one, and then they list whether political, defense, safety, all these different categories. And then you have experts making the argument for both sides. Should you
mm,
federalize troops to go to Katrina in New Orleans? And so the people were telling you why that's a good idea. You go, yeah, boy, that makes a lot of sense. And then you push the people to say no. You go, oh, yeah, that's a really good idea. And it made you understand how big. The reason all that thing is, I can only imagine the joy that we're going to have that we have this building dedicated to, because I've gone to the Bob Dylan, I've been to the Woody Guthrie. I can only imagine this Springsteen and American music is going to be awesome.
And I'm so glad you mentioned Springsteen and American music, right? Because we are the Bruce Springsteen Archives and Center for American Music. We are Bruce's official repository, yes, but our mission is twofold. It is also to teach the entirety of American history through music, right? And so when the building that you're seeing behind me opens next year, the whole first floor galleries will explore American music history more broadly. And then when you get upstairs, we get into Bruce and the E Street Band. So it's a rather lofty goal that we have here, and it separates us from other institutions that might be more strictly dedicated to a particular artist. And this is something that Bruce himself wanted. He did not want the institution to be just about him, because as he will note, he is just a chapter in the story of American music history. When I was debating leaving my full-time faculty role and moving over to serve at the archives full-time, this might sound crazy to people, but it was a tough decision for me because I loved teaching. I loved being in the classroom. I taught my first class in 2007, so I've been teaching for a long time. But I know that we will be able to reach and to educate far more people in the museum than I would ever in the classroom. And so it's just a very exciting opportunity for me as a historian and an educator to get people excited about history through this very accessible prism of music.
How much of this was Bruce driven, and how much was it that when you guys were pitching this, and it sounds like a lot of Bruce wanting to, and not, I don't want to put false humbleness on him, but the idea of, okay, if we're going to do this, let's do this bigger, right? Let's talk about everything that led up to me and what's going to come after me.
Absolutely. Just for anyone who's not familiar with the history of the institution, if I could just give the briefest thumbnail overview. So it
Please.
starts as a fan-based collection in 2001. It initially finds a home at the Asbury Park Public Library before coming to Monmouth University in 2011. It is in 2017 that we become Bruce's official repository. And then they slowly begin a campaign to raise the funds for a proper building to house the collection and to do this important interpretive and educational work. The fundraising efforts get a little, of course, waylaid by COVID. And so it's not until October of 2023 that we announce the new building. But I think as Bruce gets involved, as you note, he didn't want it to be just about him, which is why it turns from the Bruce Springsteen Special Collection, which, is the name that was originated by the fan group who starts the collection, and it then becomes the Bruce Springsteen Archives and Center for American Music. So it's not an overstatement to point out that Bruce wanted it that way. Our founding executive director, Bob Santelli, a renowned music scholar, wanted it that way. And so I think that we have here something very special and unique that is going to preserve Bruce's legacy, yes, but use him as a springboard to talk about a wide variety of issues in American history, life, and culture. Because, as I said all the time, and not to sound like a broken record, but music is one of the most accessible prisms through which we can explore our shared past. It's especially fitting that we are opening just in time for America's 250th birthday, because we've got to find creative ways to engage people with our history as we go forward into the next 250 years.
I know that Little Steven's Teach Rock is a lot about that using music to get people connected. Once again, because I'm putting all this together in my mind, when someone comes to Dallas and they say, "Where do I need to go? What do I need to see?" Well, I say, "Of course, you need to good Tex-Mex, and here's a few places. But if you have time, the sixth floor museum really needs to go." And they're like, "Oh, I'm not an assassination buff," or I'm like, "No, the museum does a great job of setting what the times of President Kennedy and what the culture was like and what the government was like and what the world was like before they go into that." And so I love the idea that, and first off, I I I giggle in a fun way every time you guys give the title, because Penn Jillette talks about that he went to clown college. He actually went to the Ringling Brother and Barnum and Bailey's circus, and I'm getting it wrong. And they said, they drilled into you. You don't say Ringling Brothers. You say Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey, blah, 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 blah. And so every time, it is the full, you guys don't shorten it. Yeah, we're at the Springsteen Archives. No, the Bruce Springsteen Archives and Center for American Music. And I have my little mug I won. And
It is a mouthful and it does not lend itself to a tidy acronym. It's funny. My first big person job out of college was as a command historian for the U.S. Army Communications Electronics Lifecycle Management Command at Fort Monmouth. So I'm kind of used to these long titles, and the font on your business card just gets smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
But again, saying the full name is so important because both parts of the mission are so important. And we have different constituencies, right? There are the Bruce Springsteen fans. And of course, we love them and we want to cater to them, but we're not just here for them, right? We are here for scholars. We are here, heck, if you don't like Bruce Springsteen, I'm sure there's some type of music you do, right? And
Yes.
in our American Music History Gallery, we will cover all types of artists and genres across time. So, yes, it doesn't lend itself to a tidy abbreviation or acronym, but it's important.
I want to start at the beginning for a few minutes. Where did you grow up? And what kind of music did you listen to? But also, was history always something that intrigued you?
Yeah, I am our resident New Jersey history nerd through and through. I
Okay.
was born and raised here at the Jersey Shore. Always loved history, but it wasn't clear to me you could make a job of it. When I went to Monmouth University, I'm a Monmouth alum twice over. I did both my undergrad and my master's there. Initially, I thought I would go to law school. But through a series of twists and turns and my internship with the national parks out at Fort Hancock, I wound up working as a historian for the US Army at Fort Monmouth, as I said, from 2004 to 2011. So, yeah, lifelong Jersey Shore girl and always a history nerd.
And you remember when you first discovered Bruce?
We're working on three generations of Bruce in my family here now. It was just part of the soundtrack of my youth growing up. My mom and Bruce actually share a birthday, September 23rd. Although my
Nice.
mom is always careful to point out she is several years younger than Bruce.
Okay.
Bruce just always part of the soundtrack to my childhood growing up. Bruce, the Eagles, Fleetwood Mac. So I've just known Bruce's music as long as I can remember and have such positive associations with it. My mom listening to Bruce while prepping for family parties, things like that. And then just my age range being what it is, the music that my peers listened to would have been like Nirvana and Blink 182, Simple Plan, The Starting Line, Dashboard Confessional. I have very eclectic music tastes myself. So there's that
Yeah.
music I grew up with. I have an aunt who's only a few years older than me who was in the hair bands era. So give me your Poison and your Guns N' Roses and your Trickster also. The thing is, I think I run into in this line of work a lot of music snobs, and I have no time for that personally. I think people should be able to whatever music makes them feel good, and they should not have to apologize for it.
I think the wrong guilty pleasure is the wrong term for music. It's just pleasure. And I'm too old to give any F's about if I enjoy blank, Barry Manilow, right? Or Brad Paisley or Jason Isbell or Ray Stevens, just picking people. Good. If it brings you joy, listen to it.
Absolutely, especially I feel like sometimes it feels like the world we live in is a dumpster fire. And if that music is going to give you any joy, by all means, grab that with
Yeah.
both hands.
So you mentioned that you did not know history could be a career, but walk through how how did you end up in Monmouth teaching?
When I was a Monmouth University undergrad, as I noted, I thought I'd go to law school, but every Monmouth University undergrad has to do some type of experiential education. And in my case, as I noted, I did an internship out at Fort Hancock with the national parks, and I did oral history interviews and I helped to curate exhibits. I worked under an amazing park employee, Mary Rassa, and I loved it. But when that experience was over, I went back to Monmouth and continued my work. I was very fortunate, though, in that Ms. Rassa recommended me for a job at Fort Monmouth. It wasn't even something I was aware of. I wasn't looking for a job because I was still finishing my undergrad, but I interviewed for this entry level position at Fort Monmouth and started working there. So I was in the very, very rare position of finishing my undergrad and already having a great full time job. So I worked at Fort Monmouth in the Command Historical Office there, as I said, from 2004 to 2011. Fort Monmouth was a military base in central New Jersey here that started during World War I, and at the time I was there was supporting operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. So in any given day, I could be working with documents from the World War I era from our archive, or doing an oral history interview with someone who had just come back from Iraq or Afghanistan. The base was ordered to historian for the wind up working as a public historian for the U.S. Army at Fort Monmouth.
Yeah.
On any given day, I could be doing research about World War I in our archive, or I could be doing oral history interviews with personnel who had just come back from Iraq or Afghanistan. So it was incredibly fulfilling work. I would have been happy to stay there forever. I think that I noted the Army actually paid for me to go back and get my master's in history at night. So I did
Wow.
that also, yep, at Monmouth. And then I was very fortunate because Monmouth invited me to start teaching a class as soon as I finished my master's. So that's how big of a history nerd I am. I would work full time all day and then run over to Monmouth and teach a class at night. That
What
actually worked out in my benefit because when the base closed in 2011, I had the option of moving with my job to Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. But I always joke and say that I resigned in protest rather than leave the state of New Jersey. And I was invited eventually to teach full time at Monmouth. So that's how I wound up teaching full time. And I taught a wide variety of classes, over a dozen classes: Western Civ, US history, New Jersey history, the Vietnam War. And then I teach skills-based classes for students who want to do history outside the classroom. I noted earlier that when I was an undergrad, I didn't realize you could actually make a living being a historian. That had never really been explained to me. But I want our students to know that. And so I started teaching classes in things like museums and archives management, historic preservation, oral history, all of the things that I had been doing for the Army, I wanted to teach our students how to do so that they would be better equipped to enter the workforce and do history outside the classroom if they so chose. And it was in the course of teaching those classes I designed that I started working with the archives in 2016.
what do you it, during your day gig back when you were teaching, right? And I know you still teach some. Do did you incorporate music into that class if it was appropriate?
I did. I've always tried to work music into my classes where appropriate because, first of all, I think music is as legitimate a primary source as any census or diary or newspaper. Music very often documents the time period in which it was produced. If we were looking at, say, World War One, we might look at how music produced during America's period of neutrality pushed neutrality. And then when we get into the war in 1917, all of a sudden the music is over there. Or the Vietnam War, of course, is a class that's rife to talk about music as a primary source. So, yes, always incorporated music. As far as working with the Springsteen collection specifically, as I said, I think I first started working with them in 2016 because in my skills based classes, we had long partnered with local institutions. So, for example, if it was an oral history class, we might partner with the National Guard Militia Museum of New Jersey, who has a very robust oral history collection. And instead of taking a blue book exam at the end of the semester, the students would practice their oral history skills by doing oral histories for the National Guard Militia Museum, et cetera, et cetera. So once the Springsteen collection gets to Monmouth and is up and running, and they want faculty to get involved in it, for me, it was the perfect sandbox for my students. Now we don't have to partner with a public history institution off campus. There's one on campus we can partner with. And so we started doing oral histories for the archives. We started doing exhibits with the archives. In fact, the archives first ever traveling exhibit came out of a class project of mine and then became Springsteen, his hometown, at the Monmouth County Historical Association in 2019. So even though I didn't leave my full-time faculty line to work for the archives full-time until August of 2023, I had been working with them in my faculty role since 2016.
You mentioned you were torn that because you are a history nerd, your words, not mine, though I love that. The idea of working full time back what you were doing with the military is appealing, but you also love teaching. Talk to me a little bit about that inner struggle you had.
And I think when I say that to people, they're like, "You're insane. I would give up my firstborn child to have your
Yeah,
job." And I don't want to sound like ungrateful or anything. Of course, I love my
yeah.
job and I'm happy to be doing this work. It's just that I loved teaching. I
Mm.
loved teaching. I loved being with our Monmouth University students. They are just the best. I loved my colleagues in the Department of History and Anthropology. But as I noted earlier, at the end of the day, it came down to Monmouth prides itself on its small class sizes and the fact that every student gets a personalized relationship with their faculty. That's wonderful, but it means maybe I would see 100, 120 students in a classroom in a given year.
Yeah,
They expect, at least conservative estimate, 50,000 people to come through our new building the first
right.
year. When I looked at the platforms and where I thought I might be able to educate the largest number of people to do the most good, it was clear that moving over to this role would allow me to do that. And as I said, I'm very grateful for that opportunity.
Yeah, I can imagine that. And so do you still teach every once in a while? Do you do a class or?
I do. Now I teach one class per semester, and I focus on those classes that are directly related to my work for
Okay.
the archives. So, museums and archives management, oral history, historic preservation, and I'll continue to have my students do projects for the archives, which helps us because we have a very tiny team, but also provides the students with hands-on experiences that they can deploy in their life after Monmouth.
Yeah, one of the things that I've talked about is that you guys have been very kind, that you thought that maybe my archive of episodes would be something that if I could get them over to you guys would have students or volunteers to archive those and are truly oral histories of Springsteen fandom. And I was like, gosh, that's very flattering, but yes, I could see why. Yeah, I love the idea of that this is not just a museum, and I'm sure that this happens in all the cases, but it also a academic center that 100 years from now, when people are looking at music in the 80s and the 90s, this era, that they're going to be able to go here, research, and find out a perspective of how music told that story.
Yeah, again, towards this point, I keep pushing that we're building something very special here. It's not just like a tourist destination, right? We
Yeah.
will have roughly 10,000 square feet of exhibits, right? So there's going to be plenty to come and to see, but we will also maintain that archive. So when I talk about us having a lot of different constituencies, there's the Bruce fans, there's the music fans. We hope we're going to have Clash trips coming constantly. There's the researchers who will come and who will access the archives, and that archive will continue to grow. So we try very thoughtfully to serve a lot of different audiences. And that can be very tricky because your podcast dealing so much with the fandom as it does, you understand there are people who have this encyclopedic knowledge of Bruce. We want to engage them, we want to entertain and to stimulate them, but how do I entertain them and also a fifth grader who has never heard of Bruce Springsteen? That is a tricky mandate. And so we have to try to bridge that gap in thoughtful ways.
I think the idea of if you want to just as part of your trip to the shore, you can go spend a half a day or a day enjoying and seeing this. But the same way, and I'll mix my metaphors, a presidential librarian, where you want to go, okay, I'm doing research on the Vietnam War. I'm going to go to the LBJ Museum in Austin and deep dive into these documents. You have both those, as you said, contingencies, right? You like these are audiences that are different, and sometimes the overlap is very small.
Correct, correct. And I say this a little tongue in cheek, but I can be a little afraid of the Uber Springsteen fans, right? Because they do have such encyclopedic knowledge and because they often are looking for a certain interpretation, right? So it
Yes.
can be a daunting task to try to accommodate everyone. But to go back to this point about education, like we are on a university campus for a reason.
Yeah.
This institution could have just existed randomly anywhere in Asbury Park or in Freehold, but it is on a university campus for a reason to drive home that point that it is a center of learning, right? And yes, we want you to come and have fun, yes, but the main goal here as a nonprofit educational institution is that it is a center of learning. And we hope that everybody comes in and learns something new or thinks about something from a new angle when they leave, whether you are a fan who has seen 500 shows, right? Or you are a seventh grader who came in and was looking at an interactive that explores the artists that influenced Bruce and how Bruce has influenced modern artists today. We've got to have something meaningful for all of those different demographics.
I get that. So if you don't, I'd love to talk a little bit. I was lucky enough to be involved in the 50th anniversary of Born to Run. So your focus was Sunday, the academic conference, correct? Did you
It
had
was a marathon week, right? We had
yeah,
6 back-to-back days of events. And that's after we opened Springsteen and Long Branch a couple weeks
yeah.
prior. So it's been a marathon Born to Run anniversary for our tiny team, which was only 4 full-time people. We only have 4 full-time people. We just actually made our wonderful processing archivist, Graciela, full-time. So now we've got 5 full-time people, but it's a lot of work for 5 people. My primary responsibilities during the Born to Run celebrations were the Springsteen and Long Branch exhibit, the Eric Miola photography exhibit, and of course, the wonderful academic conference on Sunday.
How many people ended up being there on how many people presented on Sunday,
We had
roughly?
close to 100 presenters. We
Okay,
actually had to turn folks away. As we were planning the conference, we only had one day because it was part of so much that was
sure.
going on. It was also the first week of classes on the university, so things were a little hectic. So we had to fit it in one day. And we put that call for papers out, and we were just inundated with incredibly smart, thoughtful paper proposals. It was so hard to cull them and to decide who we unfortunately couldn't accept just based on the logistics of the time and the space available. So, yes, we wound up with close to 100 presentations. We had at times 7 concurrent rooms running, and we'd still have to turn some people away based on the capacity of the largest room that we were using for our plenaries. We wanted to have no more than 150 attendees. We wound up close to 200 because people kept having a reason that we had to let them in, and they but I point that out just because it was an overwhelming success. It exceeded all of our expectations, and it was so heartening again for me as the history nerd. We knew everybody was wanted to be there Saturday for the symposium. Everybody was going to want to see Bruce and the band. And of course, that's a big, fun, historic event in and of itself. But that so many people wanted to convene and discuss scholarly takes on Springsteen's work was incredible.
Yeah, I've had two or three people that I met on Sunday reach out to me and said, "Hey, you mentioned you'd love for me to be on your podcast." And so I I've had two or three already, and I'm hoping some more because as much as I love talking to fans, and I do, I love hearing people's stories and why, but I'm also fascinated. Like a few years ago, I had a professor who compared Springsteen on Broadway to the Odyssey and how they both told the same story, right? And you're like, wow. And Dr. Womack has been on the podcast a couple of times where we talk about his theory. So I love seeing these different perspectives. Thank you, by the way, for including. I both Ed, Flynn, and I felt a little bit which of these are not like the other because we were just talking. But it was so nice that you gave us a chance to share that.
But if I could point out, I don't know how many people in your audience generally go to academic conferences, but a lot of times you go to an academic conference and it's usually a professor or somebody gets up and they just read their PowerPoint slides for 10 minutes and then they sit down, and that's fine. That's the traditional format. But here we had people giving presentations with PowerPoint slides, yes, but then we had roundtable discussions. We had people getting out instruments and playing in the midst of their presentations. Not only were the topics so wide ranging and fascinating, but the presentations were really creative and engaging too. You can see me
Yeah,
getting excited because I was
yes,
just
I
so
can.
proud of that day.
What's so funny, Melissa, I'm glad you brought that up, is I had never been to an academic conference before.
Okay.
I had certainly been to business conferences where they'd show case studies or you do presentations. And so you were nice enough to say, hey, I could use some help moderating. Is anyone interested? And I greedily picked two spots. And so the first one I'm on, I introduce them and they start reading. And I'm like, wait a minute, you should be performing. You should be doing a presentation. And then the next person did that. And I went, oh, okay, that's what they're supposed to be doing, Jesse.
That is pretty standard for your academic conference. Yeah. So wait, can you tell us, not that I'm supposed to be asking the questions here.
No, please.
So you moderated panels. Tell us, give us the gist of the presentations that were on those panels you moderated.
Yeah, they talked about one of the panels was Springsteen marketing. And I cannot remember the man's name, so I apologize that. But he talked about his whole presentation was showing like Harley Davidson and other brands and how Born to Run became a brand. And whether the idea Bruce consciously tried to make it a brand or subconsciously, but he listed all the things that a brand entails and then showed how that Born to Run, not just the song or the album, but the whole thing. And for examples of how many times people have parodied the cover
Mm.
or did homages. And so that was fascinating. And then the other conference was individual songs and the purpose about it. And they got in deep about that. It was fascinating. And I attended the religion one. I did feel bad. The second presenter had a very quiet voice and the air conditioning was going loud. So I think the feedback was next year try to have mics or the next time we do this for people. But it was fascinating hearing Bruce's how much religion, whether, and he talks about it is, but how much it fed into his music. So I was fascinated by it. I was actually torn, and that's the nature of the business, is if I'd had my way, there would have been one room and just that way I could have seen everything.
I know, 7 rooms going at once. It was very hard to pick where you wanted to be. And if I can just, circle back, you just mentioned marketing, you mentioned religion. It wasn't just historians, right? It
Yeah.
was very, very interdisciplinary. We had people from all walks of academia and beyond there presenting. So it was so rich, and I was so honored to be a part of it. I was again, just one committee member, I want to make sure I give a shout out to
Yeah.
Ken Womack, Joe Rapola, David Hamilton Golland, Carly Miglorisi was our student representative. Bethany Dickerson in the dean's office was enormously helpful with logistics. It was a real takes a team effort to get something of that scale and scope together, particularly as it was, as I noted, just one of 6 back-to-back days of events that the archives had going on.
Were you able to take your management and hat off on Saturday, and were you able to at least enjoy a little bit as a fan?
A little. I did have to moderate a panel on Saturday, so
Yes, and you did a great job.
I wasn't totally off the hook on Saturday. But yeah, it was amazing. And I had my son there with me. I have 2 sons, 14 and 17. The 17-year-old is a very talented musician. Piano is his main instrument. I noted way at the top of the
Yeah,
podcast
third
that
generation.
third
Yeah.
generation. So my mom passed it down to me, and now my son, who is this talented musician, he can play most of Bruce's catalog on the piano. So to be able to share that moment with him, especially the end, the performance,
Yeah.
was really special, and I think a core memory for both of us, I hope.
Yeah. I, what was funny is from the very first presentation with that band, that 74 band, right? There it there's it looks like musical instruments covered by tarps. So
Yes.
it was this tease the whole time. Yes, as cool as the music was, and in fact, yesterday my son interviewed me for the podcast to celebrate my 10 years.
Nice.
And
Congratulations.
yeah, and he said, "How many times have you seen Bruce perform live?" And I said, "Only 20." I said, "Wait, 21."
Oh!
So, how about you? Not that the amount of times you've seen Bruce perform live is a fair barometer of how big of a fan you are, but how many times have you seen him perform live?
So everyone finds this hysterical. I've only seen him perform like locally here in Jersey. I've never seen a full stadium show. I've seen him
Okay.
perform at Monmouth many times, back to when he was rehearsing for his Broadway show. He played Light of Day at the opening of our Monmouth
Yeah.
County Historical Association exhibit. So I've only seen him play locally. You have to understand, I got married at 22 years old. I had my first child by 24. We didn't have time or money to be going to
Sure.
concerts. I worked full time. Like, yeah, I've only ever seen him perform locally. And what
Yeah.
I'm always telling people is my job is to be our historian,
Right.
to be our curator, not to be the person in the room who has seen Bruce in concert times.
Yeah. Memories of meeting him the first time in this role?
When did I meet him the first time? My goodness. I'm really not sure. I know I met him in 2019 in Freehold for the opening of that exhibit. And then now we just see him and it's just Bruce is here. We
Yeah.
take him through tours of the building construction site and he's there for
Yeah.
rehearsals. And he is just so low key and like low maintenance. And it's just, oh, Bruce is here.
Oh, how fun. Yeah. So, when do you think, first off, what can we as fans do to help the Archives and Center for American Music?
Oh gosh, what can you do to help us? If anyone thinks they have anything interesting to donate, please don't just send it to us because we are pressed for space. But if you have anything you think you might want to donate, you can reach out. SpringsteenArchives.org is our website. My email is mziobro@monmouth.edu. Just Google. You can find the archives. You can find me very easily Googling. So if you've got things that you might be interested in donating, please reach out. You can support by buying our merch, right? We are a 501c3. So
Yeah.
we are not directly funded by Monmouth University. We have to raise both our annual operating costs and the capital costs to build this beautiful building. So if you can support by buying our merch, either at our outpost in Asbury Park, which will be open for a few more weeks, or on our website, or if you are moved to donate via our website, again, 501(c)(3) tax deductible. And then just coming and supporting our events. If you are local to the Jersey Shore, you can come to our events. We do have some virtual programming. And of course, coming to visit when we open next spring, summer.
Yeah, I'm excited. And I'm hoping that similar to other there will be you can buy annual memberships or support the I'm sure that will be part of it.
Absolutely. We
Yeah,
are, yes, we are working on that right now. And that'll be another wonderful way that people can show their support.
good. I've got to before I let you go, are there favorite songs or albums that mean to you a lot to you?
Every time I am interviewed, I probably say a different answer. I think a lot of it, right, depends on the mood you're in. I
Exactly.
am pretty solid in that I always say my favorite albums are the first two, Greetings from Asbury Park, New Jersey, Wild Innocent, East Street Shuffle. And those albums, all of your listeners, I'm sure, know the story, how they don't sell in the volume that the record company would like. And it's perhaps because they are too rooted in Jersey Shore life. That's why I love them the most.
Yeah.
That is my life, the Jersey Shore. And then favorite songs, Lost in the Flood is always up there because I do a tremendous amount of work with our military and veterans, The Wall. And if I just need to have fun, of course, Rosalita.
Yeah, I absolutely. What should I've asked you that I haven't, Melissa?
Oh my goodness. I don't know. I think we've had a wide-ranging conversation. I appreciate the opportunity to tell you a little bit about our history and what we've got going on currently and our exciting plans for the future. I appreciate you asking how folks can support us. And
Okay.
I just cannot wait for everyone to see what is in store for you when we open in the late spring, early summer of 2026. As I said, we've got something for all of our Bruce Springsteen fans, but it's far beyond that, right? We are going to have wide ranging discussions about the way that music has both shaped and reflected American life for 250 years.
Well, that sounds great. And please, anytime you have something to promote or something you want to, please know you have an open door to reach out to me and we'll schedule another time. So before I get you out of here, though, I end every podcast with the Mary question. So what that is, Jay Armstrong, who is now retired, but at the time he was an honors English teacher in the Philadelphia area and he would give his students the lyrics to Thunder Road, and they would read it as if it was a poem, discussing the themes and imagery Bruce uses, comparing it to Robert Frost and other American poets. And he would ask his class at the end, "Do you think Mary gets in the car?" So, Melissa, that is your question. Does Mary get in the car at the end of Thunder Road?
While she might be insulted that she's not a beauty, but she's all right, I still think she does get in the car. Because outside of that one backhanded compliment that my students always enjoy picking apart, I
Yes.
think he makes his case about how they've got to take this shot at happiness and see where it goes.
Yeah, I always think if I was in your class, I would say that I feel that Mary has a tendency to talk bad about herself, to say, I'm not that pretty, I'm not that interesting, oh, I'm not worthy. And so by him saying that, he is taking that objection and putting it aside. That's my justification. My wife, the other stands, go ahead, please.
No, I was going to say, and isn't that so beautiful? We can all interpret it differently. That's
Yes.
the beautiful thing about historic documents from the past, which I would assert the lyrics to this song are now a historic document from the past. We can read them and we can come up with our own interpretations and then have these robust, fascinating discussions about why we feel what we feel.
Yes, that is why I love ending the podcast with this because we're different. I just had someone who is she is now no longer teaching, but she was, and she said, "Oh, I'm so glad you gave me the context because I was nerding out." And she goes, "I think," as she actually said, "this reminded me of Emily Dickinson." And I think the narrator's death,
Mhm.
that the narrator from Thunder Road is death, and he's saying, "Come in," and she does have to take the ride because we all have to. And I was like, I love that thought.
Wow. Wow. That's,
Yeah.
I think you need to do an episode that's just a compendium of folks' answer to that question. That would be fascinating. In
Yes.
fact, wait, I also want you to do a paper on it at our next conference.
You know what? That's a good challenge. I
I
think it
want to
would.
see a statistical analysis of how folks have answered that question. That's your homework.
Okay, I love it, Melissa. Thank you so much. You've already showed people how to reach you. So yeah, go to the website, Bruce Springsteen Archives and Center for American Music. You can sign up for the mailing list. I've done that. There is some wonderful ideas there. There is some great merch that goes toward helping. And thank you for being a joy. Thank you for all your hard work for that weekend. It was so nice to get to meet you in person and to spend a lot of time corresponding with you. Any final thoughts?
No, I just appreciate you being open to having a history nerd here on your podcast. And I look forward to continued collaborations in the future.
Sounds awesome. All right, listeners, as I said, go to the website. Now, everyone be safe, be kind, and we'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.